The lawyer of a BC nurse who had her license suspended for her stance on protecting female-only spaces claims the nursing college is using its power to silence opinions.
A protest planned in Toronto in opposition to liberal mass immigration policies has attracted the ire of leftist activists and politicians who are vowing to hold their own counter-protest.
The Liberals' Online Streaming Act is facing renewed criticism by online law experts, saying it will strip away privacy safeguards. Hello Canada, it's Wednesday, September 3rd, and this is the True North Daily Brief. I'm Isaac Lamoureux.
And I'm Zoltan.
We've got you covered with all the news you need to know. Let's discuss the top stories of the day and the True North exclusives you won't hear anywhere else. The legal representative of a BC nurse who had her license suspended for her stance on protecting female-only spaces said the rules must be applied equitably across the board and not selectively against opinions regulators disagree with. Amy Ham had her nursing license suspended and was ordered to pay $93,639 in legal costs earlier this month by the disciplinary panel of the British Columbia College of Nurses and Midwives. The measures came after she defended women's right to female-only spaces, including change rooms, washrooms, and prisons. Lisa Bildy, her lawyer, said, quote, "They only penalized her for 4 things that she said. Some were in articles. One was a podcast with Megan Murphy where she had specifically said that she was a nurse or a nurse educator, so they tried to draw a nexus to the profession with that. Now everybody in the world knows she's a nurse." Ham, a nurse educator for over 13 years, co-sponsored a Vancouver billboard in 2020 that read, "I heart J.K. Rowling," referring to the author's support for women's rights and desire to protect female-only spaces. The billboard received complaints from a Vancouver city councillor and activist before being taken down. Bildy said, quote, "That's really their hook to say, well, you may be off duty, but you identified yourself as a member of this profession, or people know you are. Therefore, you're embarrassing or putting the reputation of the profession into disrepute by your comments." However, Ham was not expressing her beliefs from her perspective as a medical professional, but rather as a private citizen. The college maintained advocating for women-only spaces was discriminatory if it excluded transgender women. So, Alex, what was the disciplinary council's response to Amy Ham's defense in this case?
Well, Isaac, it's kind of the most absurd and insane response you could possibly expect, because what they have said is that Amy Ham deserves not only to no longer be a nurse, but also to pay this ridiculous fine because she one time claimed that she was a nurse on a podcast or wherever else she happened to do that. And that's actually absolutely accurate. She is a nurse. So what the College of Midwives and Nurses is suggesting is that being a nurse is immutable. If you are a nurse and you say you are a nurse, anything you say is said from the standpoint of a nurse, and you will always be a nurse and you cannot change that. But what they were also saying simultaneously is that gender is mutable. It is changeable. This is incredibly unscientific and frankly outrageous and ridiculous. And just because somebody happens to have a profession and they say something during the time in which they had that profession does not mean that they are forever identified as that profession. People are allowed to change their jobs. Obviously, people cannot change their biological sex.
One other thing, just to confirm, Alex, was Amy Ham's name was not on this billboard, nor was her profession or the nurses or anything to do with that, right? Like, she just co-sponsored it. So, I mean, even saying that this billboard was related to her identity in any way would be inaccurate. Is that right?
What I'm trying to say is that she is being attacked by her profession on account of having that profession, as if somebody can't simply change their profession. I mean, I believe, to the best of my knowledge, that Amy Ham wants to continue being a nurse, but somebody is not defined for their entire life by a profession that they happen to have at one time. It's a very strange argument, I believe, that the College of Nurses and Midwives is making in this case. A planned protest calling for a pause to mass immigration and also calling for mass deportations of non-citizens, illegal immigrants, terrorists, and fraudulent visa holders has drawn the ire of several Antifa activists and leftist politicians. The so-called Canada First rally is set to take place on September 13th, 2025 at Christie Pitts Park in Toronto, Ontario. One of the official posters for the march, organized by Joe Anajar, a 5-year activist and founder for the Canada First movement, reads, "Stop mass immigration, start mass deportations, remigration is necessary." The protest has garnered the support of UK-based activist Tommy Robinson and is planned on the same day as a UK Patriot protest in London. Anajar said the UK protest is expected to bring over 1 million people. He said the Toronto rally is not just about Canada, but the entire Western world. Anajar told True North that the protest isn't about making demands, but to remind Canadians that it's okay to discuss the need to roll back mass immigration. He said, quote, "Mass immigration is a very controversial topic, but my stance is that it's absolutely destroyed our country. It's affected so many different things in our country. Anywhere from housing to the crime spike in our country to just the total lack of respect for our culture and identity. Canada took in 817,000 new immigrants in the first 4 months of 2025 when tallying up both permanent and non-permanent streams." In a post to Facebook, former NDP MP Charlie Angus said the protest will bring, quote, "race haters." And he is encouraging everyone to come out in defiance of the protest to, quote, "help preserve our history of inclusion and diversity." He called on his supporters to, quote, "uphold the legacy of the Christie Pitts riots in 1933 when 10,000 people fought in the streets against swastika clubs, which were intimidating Toronto's Jewish population." Anajar said choosing that location was coincidental, as he didn't even know about the history of Christie Pitts riots before organizing the event, and he chose the site for its beauty and accessibility to Toronto's transit system. In a post to X, Anajar showcased some of the comments from leftist activists calling for violence against the anti-mass immigration rally and said Angus's calls for counter-protesters to uphold the riot's legacy could be an incitement to violence. So, Isaac, what are some of the leftist politicians and activists saying about this protest? And do you think what they're saying constitutes a potential incitement to violence on either side?
Yeah, Alex. Well, on one side, opponents of the rally are trying to frame this as a dangerous event. For example, Toronto councillor Diane Sachs issued an official statement calling it a hate demonstration, saying it is rooted in primitive, disgusting beliefs about immigrants contributing less to Canada. She went so far as to alert Toronto Police's hate crime division and warned residents to report any hate incidents connected to the protest. And as you briefly mentioned, former NDP MP Charlie Angus has been equally vocal, framing the rally as an echo of past battles with extremism. But Joe Anajar, the protest leader, also highlighted one person organizing protests to be Christie from the Workers' Action Centre, and that organization previously called to give full immigration status to anyone working in Canada. Posts circulating online from Antifa-aligned accounts have only added fuel, with some comments openly threatening confrontation, and Anajar said this is proof that critics want to silence dissent through intimidation rather than debate. Anajar has also repeatedly pointed to Prime Minister Mark Carney's embrace of the Century Initiative, which is, of course, a plan to bring Canada's population to 100 million by the end of the century, and he calls this as evidence that mass immigration is not just a temporary spike, but a long-term agenda. Anajar has also highlighted the economic angle, arguing that companies exploit immigration to drive down wages, using chains like Tim Hortons as examples of a Canadian brand that, in his words, quote, "isn't even Canadian anymore." But beyond policy, there's a strong cultural dimension to his appeal. He says older generations would be disgusted to see how major cities have become unrecognizable, and argues that Canadians have been conditioned to avoid hard conversations about national identity. For Anajar, the rally seems to be a chance to reset that conversation, and he stresses over and again that it will be a peaceful event, warning anyone who shows up looking for violence or even going as far as wearing masks that they are not with the movement. And one other thing I wanted to highlight quickly about Anajar and this event is how pro-Canada he's been about it. He's really emphasized that angle that this is a pro-Canada event, so he's really just trying to protect his vision of what Canada is.
And above all, he's calling for a very peaceful protest, as opposed to the NDP former MP Charlie Angus, who is evoking images of violent riots from the 1930s.
The Online Streaming Act is facing renewed criticism, this time for inadvertently removing privacy safeguards. University of Ottawa law professor Michael Geist wrote in a blog post this week, quote, "A provision stating that the Broadcasting Act shall be construed and applied in a manner that is consistent with the right to privacy of individuals was removed from the bill, leaving in its place two near-identical provisions related to official languages." He added, quote, "The net effect is that with little notice, the Broadcasting Act has for the past 2 years included an interpretation clause that makes no sense, and efforts to include privacy within it are gone." The error was first noticed by Monica Auer, Executive Director of the Forum for Research in Policy and Communications. The Department of Canadian Heritage confirmed it was aware of the, quote, inadvertent oversight and would be, quote, looking into it. The Online Streaming Act forces platforms like Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Spotify to promote and financially contribute to Canadian content. Senator Julie Meville-Deschênes introduced an amendment to the Act during its legislative process on the recommendation of the Federal Privacy Commissioner, which ultimately became part of the legislation. The Act originally stated it would be interpreted consistent with privacy rights. However, 2023 Official Languages Bill mistakenly replaced this privacy clause with a second provision on linguistic communities, leaving the streaming bill with no privacy protections. So, Alex, what are some of the criticisms of the Online Streaming Act when it was first announced?
Well, many of the criticisms of the Online Streaming Act when it was first announced are still the existing criticisms of the Online Streaming Act. This is not a well thought out bill for many, many reasons. And it's one that I think most Canadians will find pretty unpalatable for many reasons. First of all, it already identifies an issue of too much government intrusion. It makes it very, very difficult for businesses to deal with Canada. Canada is requiring businesses to offer specific content and in specific languages. As an online streaming platform, that makes Canada a less hospitable working environment as a company. The other issue that you have with the Online Streaming Act as well is that it could potentially target individual content creators in Canada, therefore reducing opportunities for YouTubers and for other entrepreneurs who want to create their own content. It really is a very draconian and anti-free speech piece of legislation, even just in terms of its effects, not necessarily its intention. Again, I think it's important to remind listeners and also to remind ourselves that with liberal policies, the rule rather than the exception is often that the path to good intentions is one to hell.
That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay on top of new episodes every weekday by subscribing to the Daily Brief on iTunes and Spotify. Also, while you're at it, make sure to hit us with a 5-star rating and please leave a review.